Welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This is not your episode of the week, it's the annual report. Now that Mythic Europe Magazine issue 1 is out and about, it's time for me to buckle down and put some podcast episodes in the can. Much as the Cornish and Venice episodes eventually congealed into a book, some of the following series of episodes may eventually become a book. The three broad series in the upcoming episodes are Monster of the Month, and that's an ongoing series, and it will hopefully eventually lead to another volume of Ars Magica Monsters. It's the first calendar week of each month. Mythic Cheshire. I've had trouble finding where to start on this, but recently I've hit on a series of legends based in Longdendale, which is a remote valley in traditional Chester's far northeast. It has all the standards of English folklore, like King Arthur, Robin Hood, Druids, and so on, and it may be a Covenant book, like Triamore. It will be the third calendar week of each month. I've wanted to do something in Chester since I helped write Magonomia, the role-playing game of Elizabethan sorcery. In the Magonomian bestiary, I started up a dragon, and one of the plot hooks tied a story to the Pentamerone, where eating the heart of a sea dragon causes a queen to become pregnant. It also causes the maid who cooked the heart to become pregnant just from the smell of the cooking. My idea was this would let Elizabeth have an heir without marriage. She'd likely call him Arthur because the name isn't confirmed unlucky as yet in her reign. In her reign, the heir to the throne is generally the Earl of Chester. The title Prince of Wales is also sometimes handed off, but it's a little more irregular, and she'd likely have kept it because she was always short of money. The Saga idea is that the player characters are all the children of maids-in-waiting who were brought in to witness the Queen eating the heart and smelled the juices by accident. The Earl of Chester has his own barons, separate from the English font of honour, and so that would be the player characters. They would rule as a sort of ersatz round table. The third series is Vendors in the Merceria. We've had a heap of monsters started up, but a lot of them don't seem to have made a lot of impact in available stories. I'd like to add them into the ferry market in the heart of Mythic Venice. I've only part prepped 3 so far. The first is a fey-blooded human who acts as a sort of safe centre for the characters investigating the ferry market. For Australians, he's based on Edward Cole. Edward Cole was a Melbourne eccentric who owned the largest bookstore in the Southern Hemisphere and did Barnum-style stunts to get publicity. He's the character hinted at in Mythic Venice, who decided that cranking magic books through a printing press in a high ferry aura was just a fantastic idea. Aside from Master Call, I've written up a pair of mask makers who are a magical and fairy Gorgon trying to make a sort of found family out of each other. This is made harder because Uriel is a genuine Gorgon who knew Medusa Gorgon, magical, and Gabriella is the fairy that has sprung up around her story because the Venetian habit of finding secrecy alluring and Uriel's constant masking means this sexier, more social thing walking around calling her mother. That would be confronting for anyone. In the final calendar week of each month, I'll be publishing one of these. Eventually, once I have enough of these to have some bulk, I'll add a chapter on Ars Magica Urban Fantasy, and that will presumably be another book. If I get stuck before that, they'll become the kernel of a themed issue of a magazine where I'll ask other people to contribute. This was originally my 30 Days, 30 Posts idea for this year, but I want more time on each of these people to cook. The second calendar week each month and the third in 5 Thursday months is miscellaneous. There will be some crossover. For example, the giant slug monster of Longdendale might become a monster of the month. Mythic Europe Magazine issue 2 is still dependent on sales. Time for some math for those of you who are tempted to put out a fanzine. Be aware these are back-of-the-envelope calculations that were originally done in 4 different currencies. My author costs for Mythic Europe Magazine issue 1 swapped into USD at today's rates are $692. Note for those of you scaling your own projects, A lot of the authors refused to accept payment, and I wrote 2 of the articles and didn't take payment for them. I've priced it at USD $6. With DriveThru's revenue spot, that's $3.90 pre-tax income per sale. As a rough rule of thumb, income tax and transaction fees would be about 30% in my case, which knocks it down to $2.73 per sale. Technically, it's higher on Itch or Patreon, but DriveThru is where my previous books sold most of their copies. To break even, then, is 254 sales. That's quite high, given the size of our community, and this isn't a product with a clear hook like Mythic Venice or Monsters, where I go, hey, Venice, even if you don't play Ars Magica, give me $1. One of the reasons I did this was to see whether this sort of product could stand on its own in terms of a second issue. Now here's a bit of my thinking on my release timing, which may not be suitable for American listeners. This year I know I owe a lump sum of income tax on the money brought in by the Atlas payment, Magonomia loyalties, DriveThru sales, and the difference between the Games from Folktales subscriptions and my hosting costs. I'm not sure exactly how large that is, but it's big enough that I can't call it a remunerated hobby under tax law, Australian tax law. It is assessed on June 30 and paid on October 31st because we're Australian and we pay our taxes on Halloween. That's how we do things. It is probably around $300 American at a very loose guess. If I create and then structure my writing business appropriately, some of the costs of the authors of Mythic Europe magazine issue 1 come out of that lump because the tax is on profits or drawings, not on turnover. It doesn't make Mythic Europe magazine issue 2 more likely. It doesn't pull down the break-even cost of this one product. It does, however, let me move some of the money I'd be paying on the income tax of my writing over to an expense, and this gives me a cushion for if issue 1 flops. Roughly speaking, I don't lose actual money on it if I sell 143 copies, because of that one-off presence of income from earlier writing. There is a complicated question here as to how I apportion the money coming back in from the podcast Patreons, because I gave issue 1 to all paid subscribers. So you could think of that as 37 prepaid subscriptions. If you do that, and if I get 106 sales, I feel I can say that I came out neutral on this one. I know that's not actually how the math works, because essentially I'm increasing the material to the subscribers without upping their price. But I feel that's acceptable because I don't want to run a proper subscription service for the magazine, given how tentative future issues are. 220 sales on top of the Games from Folktales subscriptions is where I can say, well, that all worked out splendidly, let's do that again at the same price point, as opposed to I should go and write another book, or I should get a team together to write specific thing with powerful hook here. So currently there are 48 sales since 30th of April, plus the 38 subscribers. I'm finding it difficult to see how many people follow the podcast. I think it's about 110 subscribers, which doesn't sound like a lot in a world with Joe Rogan in it. But if we were going to the marvellous Grand Tribunal UK, not a paid plug, just a fan of their work, if I got 110 of you in a room, I'd think that's fantastic. So thank you again to the Patreons for making all of this possible. Your saga may vary. You're getting at least one other episode this week, possibly 2. I have found out that the monster of the month that I had planned for next month is actually a monster that I've already given you in a previous month. The author just didn't know. Oh, that's too complicated. I'll explain it in its own episode. Your saga may vary.